So this lesson is called Don't Judge a Book by its Cover, or maybe you should, and the suggested grade level is actually grade 8. This is a really great lesson for 8th graders because they are becoming more socially inclined. They're really starting to focus on gender norms, social norms, what is normal for them. And this really engages with that. On top of that, it also engages with media, which they're obviously starting to go a bit more into by this point. They're going on social media like Facebook and Twitter. So this is going to teach them to really analyze what the messages are being sent from these types of media. On top of that, 8th graders are starting to be able to use higher level thinking skills, critical thinking, abstract concepts where they might not have been able to do that beforehand. So this is a really good introductory lesson for them to exercise those skills. So the main point of this lesson is to get students to analyze media in a new way than what they're used to. Specifically, what we're looking at are young adult books. And the main facet I've decided to focus on for them is book covers, specifically gender in book covers. So at the beginning of class, students will give suggestions of some of their favorite books to the teacher, and the teacher can make a list that they'll use later on in the class. The teacher should make sure that there is a good mix of boy books and girl books, so books that are specifically targeting a boy audience or a girl audience. On top of that, the teacher will make a discussion centering around gender and social stereotypes, and she'll encourage the students to kind of talk about how these stereotypes could influence a book cover design. And furthermore, like how books have the potential to either stretch or reinforce social norms. To lead a discussion on this, the teacher will use an example of a book cover that they have. I would suggest using a young adult book, something that the students would be familiar with and keep them engaged. But the teacher will just use an example and walk the students through analyzing a book cover so they become familiar with the concepts and are able to know kind of what to look for when they start doing it on their own. After the teacher uses an example, they can start to bring in some of the example books that the students suggested. So choose maybe two or three books each of a boy book and a girl book, and have the students analyze some of the differences and comparisons between these two types of books. They can focus on like the color, like which one's brighter, which one's more serious looking, who is represented on the covers, like do girl books have more girls on it, how are they dressed, how are they represented, is there a different level of seriousness versus like frilliness, and what type of messages is this sending. Some things they can look at are like maybe standards of beauty. Is that reflected? Like, do boys necessarily have to look really good on boy book covers as opposed to girl book covers? Like, what is it saying? What type of lessons and things is social media trying to reinforce, especially for young adults? After they kind of get a hold on these type of concepts, the next stage would be to have them do it on an individual level, have the students choose a book of their own that they want to use, and they can do a written assignment on analyzing it essentially. And what they can do from that is either post it on a class blog that you may have with pictures and everything, and they can really analyze it. That, or they can put together a PowerPoint presentation that really walks through what they think about it in front of the class. So you have some presentation skills in there as well. Students who come into this lesson should have prior knowledge about typical gender norms, and they should be able to compare and contrast visual images. So the main skills as well that they'll be working on is just public presentation skills, maybe some web editing skills if you have the technology for that classroom. These standards that we're focusing on is LA 8.6.3. Students should be able to develop and demonstrate an understanding of media literacy as a life skill that is integral to informed decision making. So the goals for this lesson is essentially for students to be able to interpret, analyze, and criticize book covers in order to understand and predict how media influences social values. they're supposed to engage with media on a new level, and they should be able to evaluate book covers and maybe even argue or justify why book covers are acting the way they are. To understand how media influences our values is really important, especially because this is a digital age and you need to have citizens who are critically thinking about this in order to navigate through the world. On top of that, we have I can statements. So by the end of the lessons, students should be able to answer questions like why does this book cover look like this? What messages is it sending? Who's the audience? Just these interpretive questions so they can kind of understand why books are acting the way they are. So for procedures for the lesson, you can make a list of the students' favorite books at the very beginning, kind of put it aside once you have that. It should only take a few moments. Don't spend too much time on that. Step 2 is when you will use a prepared book cover example for the class. That's when you can walk them through those analytical skills, like pointing out, oh, well, what is she wearing? What does she look like? Or how does he look? How is he acting? Really kind of pointing out maybe some of the gender differences. Another thing you can focus on specifically is how the author name is presented. For instance, if it's a female author, is the gender of the female author disguised through the use of initials like J.K. Rowling, or is it spelled out? Is there a difference between male and female authors and with the group that it's targeting? Stuff like that. Feel free to incorporate the Twitter project called Coverflip. It's a really great project that focuses on gender in YA books, young adult books, and what it does essentially is it takes a boy book and has people flip the cover into a girl book. So it really is a stark contrast in the values and ideas that we have when it comes to gender in Western society. So step 3 is to display the boy and girl books that your students chose at the beginning of the class. A good way to do that is just bring it up on the computer if you have like a projector at the front of the room so everyone can see it. Students should compare and contrast the social and cultural values for boys and girls that seem to be sent. Another thing you can also look at is maybe like gender with class values, so middle class, lower class. Is there an intersection with gender and class or even race? Feel free to open it up a bit wider than gender, but gender is just a good way to enter the discussion. So you should have students try to use a specific, like, they should be looking beyond the specific example. They should be looking larger than that. So once you have like the small particulars of analyzing a book cover, maybe try to expand your conversation if you have time to media on a larger whole. So how does media in general affect our perceptions? So internet, books, TV shows. What type of lessons are they giving us and how should we engage with that? After we have a discussion just on the book covers that the students have chosen, the rest of the time in the class can pretty much be dedicated to the individual assignment of choosing a book and beginning to analyze it. This would be a great time to pretty much do group work. Students can bounce ideas off of each other if they want. Sometimes it's really good to have other ideas and they can kind of work out what they really think. Students for the next class, if whatever they don't finish, they should do for homework. And you can pretty much choose 2 ways to do this. One of them is you can, if you have like an online class format, like a blog, I'd really encourage having students do a blog post. It'll organize their ideas and they have to be persuasive on a written format. And they're pretty much just going to be analyzing what the book is doing and maybe even justifying or justifying why it's doing that. Or you can argue kind of, oh, well, the book is working like this because they want to get these messages across, or this is a bad thing, this is a bad book cover, why is it bad? So really just critically interpreting why these books are acting the way they are and if it's a good or a bad thing. If you have students who don't have a computer at home, try to provide extra class time and opportunities for the students to make a blog. If you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, which is the other option, So instead of doing a blog post, have them do maybe a short handwritten assignment or typed up assignment, and then the main thing would be doing a 3 to 5 minute presentation from the class. Either way, if you decide to do a blog or PowerPoint, it's important that you give the students enough time to do it during class time or during class hours, school hours, sorry. And especially if you have students who don't have a computer at home, it's really good to just extend the deadline. If you want to speed things up and use less class time, maybe make the project not individually based and maybe like a group project of maybe 2 to 3 students per book cover. So to assess the students, you are going to be using a rubric. For fun, you can kind of do a top 3 desirable book covers that the students like the most. You can maybe even discuss why those book covers are the most appealing. And if you want to do a little extra credit opportunity, you can actually have the students engage in project cover flip. They can choose a book, maybe it's like a girl book, and have them switch it over to a boy book. Then they should just provide a brief summary of why they did those changes. For extensions and adaptations, I would, for instance, if you have a student who has ADHD, just make sure you use really clear instruction, be very concise in what you're saying. A good way to use technology would be leave a PowerPoint slide up at the beginning of the class, well, after you've had your discussion and they're supposed to start working. Just have it list the instructions and the time they need to be done with certain tasks, just to keep them on task. Another thing is if you have students with visual impairments, a good thing to do would be to actually have physical copies of the book that you can pass around class so they can kind of hold it in their hands and have it up close. If you have students who are ESOL students, so English is their second language, a good way to kind of get around that would be to use like a short video before the lesson that introduces some of the concepts that they're going to be going over, just as a preemptive thing. Another good thing to use is like handouts, or making sure your PowerPoint has a lot of images and instructions that go along with it. So you're reinforcing your lesson with both visuals and written sources. Finally, for additional resources for the lesson, 2 really great sources that I found were, one of them was an online article that discussed YA book covers for the 2011 calendar year, and it really focuses on issues such as gender and race. So you can really see, like, for instance, like 90% of Caucasian girls are represented on YA book covers as opposed to someone of a minority race. So stuff like that is a really good introduction and background information about the topic. Additionally, here is the link for Project Cover Flip, which specifically focuses on gender and YA books. So I hope you found this little lesson discussion helpful, and good luck.